Good morning, everyone. I hope your day is going well. On this channel, I talk a lot about Mascot horror, and Indigo Park is a game that I've been hoping to talk about for a long time. Because I really like this game, and I really want to see where the story ends up going. I think Indigo Park is a series that has a lot of potential, and this video gives me an excuse to talk about why. We'll be taking a look at the characters and story of the game, because those are the aspects that give me such high hopes for this game. To be completely transparent, this video is basically an excuse for me to talk about something I like. My last few videos have had quite a bit of me critiquing the Mascot horror genre, and while those were fun to make for their own reasons, I just really want to spend this video digging into something I find really interesting. And the way I do that is by noticing a bunch of little details and analyzing them the way that a terrier analyzes a rat. This is enrichment for me. Do not interrupt. I'm not really going to talk about my problems with this game, but that doesn't mean that I think this game is perfect. There are things I don't like about it, but right now I'm just super excited about a game I'm looking forward to, because it's my channel, and I get to have that type of unrestrained joy in my life. In this video, I'll be going into detail about why I think Indigo Park has so much potential, and I'll be talking about what expectations I have for the game going forward. This first chapter is extremely promising, but we should consider what we're actually hoping for with this game. If you're interested in a video where I take a look at things I don't like about this game, please let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll be making a companion video fairly soon. But until then, I think it's time we get started. Grab some water, your limited edition Rambley themed popcorn bucket, and get comfortable. Come with me as we explore the world of Indigo Park. Let me just cut to the chase here. I mentioned in the intro that what makes Indigo Park good as a game so far is its story. And the biggest part of that story is Rambley the Racoon. Rambley is the first chapter of Indigo Park. Without him, I'm sorry, this game would just be so much worse. There are other world-building pieces that we'll get to later, but this raccoon is at the center of everything that is going on here, and he is the vehicle through which we receive most of the lore that we get. Something I find interesting about Mascot horror is that the mascots usually aren't actually mascots. What I mean is, when making a mascot for a Mascot horror game, a lot of emphasis is put on the visual design, more than how they would actually function as a mascot for whatever company they're representing. Think about Freddy Fazbear. Everyone knows him at this point. He has become an iconic piece of pop culture. He is the mascot of Five Nights at Freddy's. He's in the title. He's on the cover. He is everything. But within that game, his function is to be a monster. This is fine. This is a horror game, after all, but we don't have any idea how he acts under normal circumstances. Remember, Freddy is part of a stage show for a restaurant. What type of personality does this mascot actually have? The fandom over the years have come up with a lot of different interpretations for this, and I think that gives the people the idea that we do have something to go on, but we really don't. Characterization for Freddy doesn't come until Security Breach, and that's an entirely different version of the bear that the franchise is named after. How does Freddy act when it comes to interacting with customers? Why was it decided that he was the best face for the company? What does he do in the dynamic of the stage show? Is he a serious but ultimately kind leader, or is he more of a goofy character that the others have to help remember his lines? Is he actually the dominant personality within the band, or does he take a back seat when the others have something to say? Within Five Nights at Freddy's, this information isn't that important, so I'm not surprised we don't hear about it, But it is strange that most of the time, the mascot in a Mascot horror game is monster first and mascot second. And Rambley is the exception to this. We do not meet Rambley as a monster. He's not just a face on the cover that's been corrupted, he's an actual character, and an extremely charming one. His voice acting is excellent, his animation is amazing, and overall you can really see why people like Rambley, both within the universe of Indigo Park and in real life. The popularity of Indigo Park can be attributed mostly to Rambley, and it's not for nothing. I'm not claiming that every Mascot horror game needs to give us detailed information on how each character would act in normal operating hours, but it's something unique about Indigo Park that helps to elevate this beyond just another Mascot horror game that's slowly going to release over time. However, because Rambley is allowed to be a character instead of just a row of sharp teeth, there's a bit of cognitive dissonance going on. Ironically, the fact that Rambley is allowed to have a personality makes him seem suspicious in the lineup of Mascot horror characters. Remember, mascots are not safe in Mascot horror games. They are the monsters almost invariably. Even if a character starts out friendly in a Mascot horror title, that probably just means that they're waiting for their cue to betray you. I don't know how much people are talking about it now, but when the chapter first released, there was a lot of thought that Rambley was secretly the architect behind everything, or at the very least he was up to no good in some way. And to be fair to these videos, Rambley isn't exactly innocent all the way down. He does some things that are pretty weird and suspicious, especially for someone who claims to just want to give us a good experience at the park. Rambley Racoon is not as clear-cut as being good or evil, and I think that's what makes him so interesting. Rambley's reaction to seeing the destruction and crumbling of Indigo Park is interesting, because it shows us his personality outside of what he's trying to perform for us, and it shows us that what he's doing is a performance. Him attempting to take us through the park as if it were a normal day is a coping mechanism. He wants us to be a normal guest, and so he acts like we are for as long as possible, because he wants to stay in denial and believe that the park that he's part of hasn't fallen into such obvious disrepair. There are two big reasons why I think Rambley is suspicious but not quote-unquote evil. Number one is it's a tired trope at this point. Pretty much everyone was expecting him to do some sort of heel turn, and I think that's a sign that maybe we should mix it up a bit. I honestly would have been pretty disappointed if he'd suddenly turned around with red eyes and tried to kill us. The second reason is that while Rambley lies and tries to cover up what's happening, he eventually stops lying. Sure, it takes a lot of time to get there and a decapitation, but eventually he does come clean about what's going on. He knows the lie can't stand anymore, and rather than getting angry, he gets sheepish, embarrassed, and ashamed. He really wanted to give us a good experience, and he wanted to feel like he was doing his job again. And while that did put us in a dangerous situation, that doesn't mean that he's some kind of cruel being that wants us to suffer. A lot of the things Rambley does feel very customer service to me. He's not necessarily deceptive, but he is performative. He does what he does because he's in denial and lonely and everything, but he's also pretending that everything is fine when we can see that it clearly isn't, which I think is very relatable to anyone who has had a bad shift. Interacting with Rambley in this game is kind of like if you decided to go and visit a really nice restaurant you remember from a few years ago, but after you hand your keys to the valet and go inside, you find that the waiter is actually the valet in a different uniform. And then after you've ordered and sat down, about 2 hours go by as you wait for your food and ignore all the sticky red puddles and scratching within the walls, as the waiter periodically comes back to reassure you that the food is on the way, don't worry, we're just a little backed up, you're the only ones in the restaurant. And eventually, finally, you go to the kitchen to try and figure out what's happening, and you find that the waiter has put on a chef's hat and is trying for the 8th time to make what you asked for, but he's having a lot of trouble because his manager turned off the electricity to the fridge last week, and also the only other cook who would be working came in hungover and threw up in the deep fryer. And now he's frantically Googling how much mold it's safe for a human to ingest without going to the hospital. And yeah, you're upset that he was planning on feeding you cooked mold, but you can kinda tell that he's running on fumes here, and it's hard to be mad at him. This metaphor got away from me. The point is, I don't think Rambley is evil. I know I've said that a couple times, but I just want to hammer that home. Is he misguided and reckless and a little bit selfish? Yes. But that doesn't mean that anything he does has a motive beyond wanting to pretend that things are the way they used to be. I can see a possible future where if the repairs don't go the way Rambley imagines, he could be overcome with his emotions and try to force us to stay there so he won't be alone again, but we're not anywhere near that point yet. And hopefully, if things go well, we'll never get there. I want to talk about this ending conversation with Rambley in detail, because I think it's great at setting up what's to come as well as paying off what's been established in the chapter about Rambley and the park. Motivations for main characters in Mascot horror games are generally vague or very simple. It usually comes down to either escape or survive. These are not necessarily bad motivations, but it can be hard to make them feel relevant after a while, especially if you're releasing your game in chapters that have big gaps one after the other. In my recent video about Outlast and Mascot horror, I mentioned how after a while in Bendy and the Ink Machine, it starts to feel like escape is just not going to happen. It's unreasonable at a certain point to expect that you're actually gonna get out of this horrific ink nightmare-scape. And if you can't do the one thing the game told you to do at the start, what's left after that? It can be hard to feel invested at a certain point if you feel like you'll be unable to do the one thing you're trying to do. Indigo Park is clever because the motivation it sets up in this moment doesn't involve leaving at all. Ed seemingly agrees to restore the park, which is a very unique setup for the series to have. The main character is named Ed, by the way. I don't know if that's common knowledge, but this is Ed. Say hi to Ed. Mascot horror games generally involve you destroying things. Again, not necessarily bad, but Indigo Park is doing something unique by making the stated goal repairing what is damaged. Most Mascot horror is rooted in nostalgia in some fashion. Something from when you were young has become corrupted and dangerous, and you have to escape or defeat it in some manner. This idea of restoring the park to its former glory is an opportunity to explore the good aspects of nostalgia. It's a twist on the normal formula, and I find it really intriguing, especially since it's a slightly doomed goal, given that repairing the park isn't going to make people come back, but I'm sure that's something that will come up in later chapters and we can get into it then. It's important to note that escape isn't necessarily off the table when it comes to motivation, because earlier I said that Ed seemingly agrees to restore the park, and I used that word very intentionally. Ed never actually says yes to staying. And he doesn't even seem to give an affirmative sign of any sort. When Rambley asks the question, he waits for about 2 seconds before saying,
I can see in your facial tracking data that you aren't opposed to this. Ooh, I'm so excited. Let's get this place back in business.
He doesn't say, "Oh, your heart rate is getting faster, are you excited?" or, "Oh, is that a smile I see on your face?" It's just him noting that you don't seem opposed. Putting aside the fact that facial recognition can just be wrong, no matter how you slice it, this is not an agreement. Rambley essentially says, "I'm not hearing a no," and steamrolls forward before Ed has any opportunity to say anything. Which is probably another reason that people are suspicious of his motivations in this moment. His expression definitely doesn't help that perception either. Rambley looks a little hopeful when he asks this question, but he mostly just seems tense. His smile is stretched to the side, his fists clenched. He doesn't seem like someone who is hopeful to get a good reaction. It's like he's bracing himself. This suggestion feels less like something he's thought about in detail, and more like an idea he's been trying to ignore that he's throwing out as a last Hail Mary. And he's expecting a rejection, possibly a very explosive one, and when Ed responds in what is seemingly a more neutral way, he takes that and runs with it. It's another example of Rambley doing something suspicious that is explained when you think about his emotional state. He wants things to be back to the way they were, and this is an effort to get that. I also don't think there's anything sinister going on, because the way that Rambley asks this question implies that he doesn't realize that Ed is trapped here. Earlier in the game, as we're entering the park, the tunnel collapses behind us. We can't leave, or at the very least we can't leave the way we came. And I think if Rambley knew about this collapse, he would have used it in his sales pitch. Something like, "Oh, well, since you won't be leaving for a little while, why not help out a little bit?" And yet, he doesn't mention it at all. Rambley might be willing to ignore possible safety hazards, but this would be a little much to just gloss over. And I think what it means is that Rambley asks this question fully expecting us to just leave him out to dry. This idea Rambley has is one he throws out at the last minute because it seems like you're about to leave and he wants you to stay, because you might be the only opportunity he has to fix things. It has been 8 years, and we seem to be the only person Rambley has interacted with in that entire time. He knows that if we leave, and especially if we leave dissatisfied, he's not going to get a chance like this again. So he's doing everything he can to get you to stay, which indicates to me that he doesn't know about the collapse that is keeping you here. All of this to say that I think Rambley was expecting a rejection, but he did not realize that rejection wasn't necessarily an option. I'm not trying to imply that Ed is definitely being held here against his will, though. Ed came back to this park for a reason. Even if his connection to Indigo Park is only childhood nostalgia, Rambley is right that he does seem to care about the park, so he could very well be on board for this and he just isn't that emotive when it comes to facial expressions. But I do like the idea of there being a possible conflict in the future where Rambley realizes that he didn't agree because he wanted to, but because he had to. They could take it any number of directions, but I like the idea that there's a possible conflict in that regard in the future. Building off of the idea that Rambley doesn't know about the collapse here, the game does a very good job of showing us that Rambley has limitations. Because throughout the game, there are a lot of things that he doesn't know or can't do. When Rambley says that he can't execute these tasks without a human user, you believe him, because the game has been going out of its way to show you that that's the case. He might be able to give you orange access, but he can't do anything if there's a physical key involved. And this goes beyond what he's physically capable of. There are several occasions where Rambley gives you false information, and he doesn't realize that it's wrong until he goes to double check, which he often doesn't do. As a computer system within the park, you would expect that he'd have access to this information at all times, but it seems like the way that his system is set up, he is not constantly checking what he's saying. He spends an entire paragraph referencing a trademark that has expired. Yes, it only expired yesterday, but you think that he would know this. The same thing applies when he tries to call a repair service and finds that the number has been disconnected. If this happened during normal operating hours, it would be very strange from the guest perspective. And maybe the most obvious example is when Rambley says the gate is open, when it is in fact very obviously closed. Rambley knows a lot, but his knowledge is not infallible, both because he's been confined to the entrance, and because he doesn't seem to check his backlog of knowledge until something prompts him to. This reinforces that Rambley really does need our help, and we need to stay on our toes because he could send us into a dangerous situation without ever realizing it. And that's probably something I should address. I fully believe that Rambley would never intentionally put us into a super dangerous situation, but he is definitely not being responsible throughout this chapter. Sure, he didn't know how much disrepair the park had fallen into, but at a certain point he definitely should have directed Ed to the nearest exit. Transparency, and I assume health and safety, are very important to Indigo Park, after all, but he doesn't, because he really wants Ed to actually just be a customer, and for things to be the way that they were, to be normal. And that's an aspect of Rambley's personality that I think makes him very intriguing to watch. The moments when his own personal desires and opinions override what he should be doing as a representative of Indigo Park. Rambley Racoon is designed within the context of the park to be a sort of combination park guide and mascot entertainer. He has authorization to get into most areas, as well as keep people out if they try and enter somewhere they're not supposed to.
That Rambley's Wrangler's room is only accessible by Royal Wranglers. Maybe one day you'll grow up big and strong enough to enter it. But for now, don't.
He's clearly very experienced with the guest entry process and can easily provide solutions to what are probably common customer problems. His train ride is designed as an introduction to the park, which is useful for getting young kids and returning guests excited for what they want to do, and for introducing new visitors to the various attractions. His personality is such that he can relate to a lot of different people of a lot of different demographics and ages, because he's a friendly and curious face that can also be a little bit cheeky sometimes. And all of these things come together to make Rambley pretty darn good at his job. I imagine that in a normal park, he works very well for keeping things organized and moving like a well-oiled machine, while also giving people the fun experience of interacting with their favorite mascot. But there are times when this performance slips. The most obvious ones are when he allows his loneliness and desperation to invite Ed into a park that has been abandoned for 8 years, but it also shows itself in the way that he treats Lloyd. At this time, we don't know why Rambley doesn't like Lloyd. His disdain is extremely obvious, but we never actually hear Rambley's reasoning for it. At one point he mentions that Lloyd is loud, and this could be a reason, but I don't think it's the reason. The fact is, Rambley could probably give us dozens of petty, surface-level reasons that he finds Lloyd distasteful, but I think the real reason is that he's jealous of the popularity that Lloyd seems to have, and Rambley thinks he doesn't deserve it. Rambley gets extremely upset about Lloyd being the only one to get a retro plushie, demanding to know why he and none of his friends got one. This, combined with the statue in the theater, implies that Lloyd might be something of a legacy character. This could make Rambley feel threatened, like Lloyd is competition trying to take the top spot. Or it could just be a difference in personality, where Rambley sees Lloyd as a show-off who really isn't all that great, and is frustrated that no one else sees this but him. And this could also be an extension of the rivalry that they're clearly written to have in their more animated productions. Whatever the reason, Rambley really doesn't like Lloyd, and it's extremely obvious from the moment the lion is mentioned. And this level of anger and annoyance is not something that I think would have been allowed if the park was running normally. As I mentioned, this poster and the canned dialogue we hear on the train ride implies that the rivalry between these two isn't completely manufactured just from Rambley. There's intended to be a level of antagonism between them. But this goes much further than a cartoon rivalry, to the point where it would be actively harmful to the business of the park if he did the same things he did. Remember, this train is intended to advertise the park's attractions, and having Rambley refuse to engage with Lloyd and basically skip over it as quickly as possible is a bad look for the park, no matter how you try and justify it. Rambley is meant to ensure that the guests have a good time here, but his dislike of Lloyd is so strong that he's disregarding guests that might enjoy Lloyd's performance. What if he's piloting a train car that has a kid who just really wants to be an actor? A little bit of competitive back and forth would probably be expected, but Rambley refuses to follow the script, and that's just not something that would have been allowed, I don't think. This whole game is happening because Rambley ignores the danger of the park because he wants to pretend that everything is fine. And in that same vein, he decides that his desire to get away from Lloyd is more important than being a good and unbiased host for the customer. And our actual interactions with Lloyd in the game put this hatred into perspective, because it really feels like Lloyd hasn't done anything to deserve that. We only have this one chapter, so I could be completely wrong about this. Lloyd could very well have caused the park to close because he killed and ate a bunch of people or something. But at least right now, the way Lloyd acts does not match the way that Rambley treats him. Lloyd spends most of his section avoiding us. He only attacks us twice in ways that seem less about hurting us and more like getting us to go away. He grabs you at one point, but immediately lets go to get into this "rawr, I'm so scary" position. If the critter cuff hadn't made this noise, I'm not even sure we would have been in much danger. Like, obviously the claws and everything, but you see what I mean, right? This feels like he's trying to be intimidating, like a kitten puffing up its fur. If he wanted to, he could have taken inspiration from a jaguar and just bitten through our spinal cord, but he doesn't. These attacks really aren't about hurting us. They're about getting us to leave. Based on everything we can see, Lloyd seems like a very shy and reclusive person, who doesn't really want anything to do with us. Which doesn't match his stage persona and certainly doesn't match the way that Rambley talks about him. It's another way to show the audience that Rambley is not infallible, and his assumptions about the world might not be accurate to what's actually going on. There's a pretty strange moment in this section where Rambley says that he can't see backstage.
Hey, buddy, I've got eyes all over the park, but I can't see anything behind the stage. If you're going back there, be careful.
But if you stop for 2 seconds to look around, you'll see that there are cameras everywhere. It's been implied throughout the game that Rambley sees through cameras. We can see cameras following us pretty much everywhere, and he specifically turns on this camera when he mentions getting a good look at us. Side note, this statue is definitely secretly a camera, but that's something for another day. The point is, Rambley sees through cameras, and there are cameras back here, so what exactly is stopping him? Is he lying for some reason? And if he is lying, why? Or there's the possibility that there's someone else watching us back here. And I'm not really sure which is worse. I mean, the mysterious sinister force seems a little bit worse, but you get my point. I'm not really sure what to make of this moment. It doesn't feel like the type of lie that Rambley usually tells, and I just don't know how to square it with everything else that happens. So I'm just hoping that we get more information in future chapters, because this just leaves a big question mark in my mind. Rambley's opinion of Lloyd tells us something about his character and how he's willing to put aside his responsibilities in favor of what he wants. But the way he treats the other living mascot of the game is arguably much more interesting. Molly Macaw is Rambley's best friend. This is not speculation or headcanon. It's something that Rambley tells us himself.
Oh, a Molly plush! She's always been my best friend.
And we also know that Rambley cares about his friends and wants the best for them. So you'd think that seeing Molly Macaw get decapitated would have some effect on him, but it really doesn't. Sure, he has a reaction in the sense that he realizes he can no longer pretend things are chill, but he doesn't have an emotional reaction to what's supposedly his best friend dying. Molly Macaw dying gets a less emotional reaction from him than seeing her broken down ride earlier.
Oh no, this is horrible. Ooh, I'm so excited. Let's get this place back in business.
Why is that? Well, I think it's because Rambley does not see this living mascot as Molly. We need to back up for a second because this might be a little bit weird to explain. Rambley says that Molly Macaw is his best friend, and that's kind of weird, isn't it? Because as far as I can tell, Molly is not real in the same way that Rambley is. Within the world of Indigo Park, not just the park itself, but the world that Ed inhabits, the mascots of Indigo Park exist as characters outside of that park. They appear in TV shows, and posters like these imply that they've had movies, or at the very least, short films. They're part of a larger franchise that the public knows about. Mascots within a theme park in real life are meant to be a sort of wish fulfillment. They allow you to step into the illusion that your favorite character is meeting you in real life. And to borrow some terminology from a very popular company, that can be a very magical experience. But ultimately, it is not real. Whoever is wearing the costume will go home at the end of the day and have normal problems and normal experiences. And the character will remain nothing more than a character, brought to life in this brief moment by a performance and your own imagination. This idea, this wish fulfillment, becomes a little warped and strange in Indigo Park, because this park seems to be doing everything in its power to make this illusion not an illusion at all. Meeting Rambley at the theme park has that same magic, I'm sure, but unlike a costumed performer, he doesn't go home at the end of the day. Rambley exists as a character in this world, and the Rambley in the park seems to believe that he is that character. Rambley the Racoon is a fictional character, and he is also very real, and he is completely alone in this weird half-fictional existence. He says that he is best friends with Molly, but the Molly that Rambley is best friends with does not exist. He cannot interact with her in a way that you actually interact with a friend. But, well, that doesn't really matter, right? Fictional Rambley is best friends with Molly, and he obviously is Rambley, so he's best friends with Molly. It doesn't matter that she only exists as pre-recorded voice lines he's heard hundreds of times before. That's Molly, and she's his best friend. and that's just the way it is. It's honestly no wonder that Rambley has such a hard time accepting the reality of the park, because his view of reality is already extremely skewed and weird. The way he views himself and his place in the world gets really existential and lonely the moment you stop to actually think about it. And you'd think, with how lonely Rambley is, he'd welcome the idea of his best friend existing in a way that's similar to him. If Molly were able to exist as a physical being and him as a digital one, there would still be a degree of separation, but at least he'd be able to talk to her. They could form an actual friendship, instead of Rambley engaging in the strangest form of dissociation I have ever seen. But here's the thing. It's easy to be friends with a fictional character, because a fictional character existing in your head can't ever disappoint you. You can imagine all the fun things you'd hypothetically do together without actually putting in the work of arranging a meetup. You can joke about the little things you find annoying about them without ever having to feel annoyed or accept that some people do things that annoy you. And from time to time, you can imagine the petty little arguments you get into that are easily resolved and silly to look back on, without ever actually needing to figure out how you deal with arguing with someone you care about. It's easy to be friends with a fictional character, because you don't actually have to do any of the work that comes with real friendship. They will always react and be exactly the way you imagine them. And that is always going to be simpler than actually trying to make friends with someone. We don't know how these living mascots act under normal circumstances, but I think it's fair to say that seeing his best friend brought to life would have been a lot more jarring than Rambley was expecting. Indigo Park Molly resembles her cartoon counterpart, but she is much more realistic in a way that I think is a bit uncanny. I think it's entirely possible that Rambley rejected this version of his friend regardless of how they acted, just because the cognitive dissonance between the physical Molly and the one in his head was too much. And this isn't even accounting for the fact that the living mascots might not be sapient like he is. Both Lloyd and Molly are pretty animalistic in their behavior, and Molly's mimicked voice lines imply that they were definitely treated as animals.
Don't touch that thing, son. Get up, you stupid freak. Get back in your cage, bird.
It definitely seems weird at first that Rambley wouldn't even make a passing comment about his best friend dying, but when you actually think about it, it's really easy to assume that Rambley doesn't view this Molly as a friend at all. Rambley's friends, and Lloyd, exist in canned recordings and cardboard cutouts. They are posters on a wall and statues in an entryway. The friendships he has with them exist only in his mind, and in a way, that makes them more real than any physical creature Indigo Park could create. Rambley's disconnected view of the living mascots was probably also reinforced by how the employees treated them. Like I already said, Molly's mimicked voice lines imply that there was some abuse going on, or at the very least negligence and apathy. With Rambley being very willing to use denial as a coping mechanism, the dismissive and cruel treatment of these mascots would likely have made it even easier to avoid seeing them as his friends, or as beings worthy of consideration at all. Maybe at some point, these living mascots could talk, and did act like people, but the years of mistreatment and loneliness have caused them to regress into a state that is much closer to their animal counterparts. We just don't know enough to make that judgment, and I don't think we're gonna hear the truth from Rambley anytime soon. Honestly, I could probably make a whole video about Rambley's psychology and the existential horror that comes with being a fictional character made real, but that's probably a video that's better to make after a few more chapters. So instead, I'm going to attempt to refocus and talk about the presentation of the game's story as a whole. Mascot horror tends to have pretty shaky storytelling. These games are very good at implying that there's a deep narrative going on, but they have a much harder time actually following through with the implications that they set up. I think this is understandable when looking at earlier entries in the genre. Surprise smash hits like Bendy and the Ink Machine and the original FNAF. The creators of these games were not expecting their little projects to become something so huge, and when they did, they went out of their way to keep making more and were basically flying by the seat of their pants. It's no wonder that things were a little all over the place. But I think this is a lot less excusable when it comes to recent entries. Production value for these games just keeps getting higher, and it's been long enough that people know what they're getting into when they decide to make one of these. And yet, it still feels like story is treated as an afterthought. Which is weird to say about a genre that has supposedly deep and complicated lore. But the fact is, the lore only seems complicated because it's often poorly explained. And once a game finally wraps up, it often seems like all that mystery was more smoke and mirrors than anything else. Future entries in a series or outside media like books can sometimes try and shore up these weaknesses, but that doesn't change the fact that the original games themselves have a lot of holes in them. A lot of these games have amazing potential in their stories and world building, but that potential is often squandered in favor of making something that's more about spectacle than clarity. And I always find that really disappointing. A story can only imply depth for so long before people start to realize that there's not any substance there. And I personally think that telling a clear story is more important than implying a mysterious one. Mysteries are fun, but I feel like Mascot horror often uses mystery as an excuse to avoid actually writing a story. You don't have to know literally everything about your world, but if you're going to set up specific questions, you should have at least some of the answers. And waiting for your community to figure out the answers for you is not a solution. I'm not saying this to try and make anyone feel bad. I'm saying this because I think your time would be better spent just trying to make a good game. If you focus on making your game the best it can possibly be, everyone will have a better time, because you will have made the game that you want to make, instead of the game that you think other people want to see. And that is much better. I would much rather people make the games they want to make, rather than try and push themselves into a mold that will hopefully make it a success. If you have a cool story to tell, go ahead and tell it. You don't have to turn it into something that's mysterious for no reason. You can just tell your story. So, what does all that have to do with Indigo Park? I'm a little bit worried that Indigo Park will eventually become something that disappoints me a little bit. There's only been one chapter, and all of the things that I've discussed are implications based on barely anything. This is a game in its infancy, and as much as it scares me to say, there's a chance that it's gonna drop the ball and follow the Mascot horror trend of being just a bit underwhelming. And that makes me really nervous because I've just spent a significant amount of time telling you all how much I love it, and that is scary. But even though it makes me nervous, I am defiantly choosing to hope that this series will end up being really good. I want it to be good, and I think it does everyone a lot more good if I decide to be hopeful than just try and shield myself from a disappointment that hasn't happened yet. I will admit that I probably have very high expectations of the game, higher than is maybe reasonable. And it's very likely that the game won't be nearly as deep as I implied it was. But I do think it has the potential to be very good and very solid in the story that it decides to tell. And really, there's only one thing that I truly want this game to do. I want this game to keep its promises. There's a lot of cool setup going on in this first chapter, and I just want this game to have good payoffs to that setup. Molly Macaw is our main character's mom's favorite, and I want that to come up in some way, even though she's not around anymore. The character of Salem has been introduced, and I just really want to know what's up with them, because it seems like there's just a lot going on with their display completely destroyed and the poster fallen, and there's just a lot going on with them that I need to know about. Rambley really hates Lloyd, but Ed says that he was one of his favorites, so is that going to become a conflict between them? Maybe, maybe not, but I'd like it to be acknowledged in some way. The bottom line is, I just want this game to stay true to its word and do something with all of the amazing concepts it has. And I really don't think that's too much to ask. I don't know exactly what's in store for Indigo Park, and I would be really, really sad if it squanders the potential that I see in it. But I also really, really like this game, and I think if it manages to find its footing and tell the story that it wants to, it's going to be something that brings me joy for many years to come. And I hope that all of you will stick with me to see that happen. Thank you all so much for watching. As I said at the intro, I've been wanting to talk about this game for a while, and this video was a pretty good outlet. But if you haven't had enough and you want to hear me talk about things even more, I'm actually going to be live in just a few hours. So if you want to directly ask me questions about some of the things I said or some of the things you're wondering, be sure to drop by my Twitch stream. It's very casual, and I'd love for you all to come say hello. I'll be streaming every Saturday at the same time, so if you miss this one, don't worry, you can always tune in for the next one. Or subscribe to my VODs channel, you can also do that. And if you'd like to support the channel in a very direct way, I have a Patreon where you get exclusive updates on what I'm working on, early previews of art, and videos early and ad-free. And I'd like to take this moment to thank all of my current patrons, including, but not limited to, Perplexia Sphinx, Snick, Tree, Lurch18489, Sphinx, I May Be Dumb, and Puppet Wraith. Thank you all once again for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye!